days ago. Iran moves to pull Gaza into U.S. talks amid bid to shield proxy network. That's right. Iran is reportedly seeking to include Gaza in its discussions with the United States in an attempt to end hostilities in the war-torn enclave as the regime seeks to preserve its regional proxy network, ramp up pressure on Israel, and influence ceasefire negotiations. On Tuesday, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, that's this past Tuesday, he told senior Hamas official Bassem Naim that the Iranian negotiation team will, quote, raise the issue of the occupiers' ongoing aggression against Gaza with Washington. Iran's top diplomat reportedly thanked Hamas for its support of the IRGC and reiterated Tehran's support for Palestinians and their just cause until their legitimate national rights are fully realized. So what's going on here? Very simple. The Iranians made a play on Lebanon. When they first brought up Lebanon, they were told by President Trump and, of course, by the Israelis that the Lebanon situation and Iran cannot be connected to each other. And Trump initially took that position. And then, of course, they were very much connected. They're so connected that the first clause in the 14-point MOU was all about Lebanon. And at the negotiations in Geneva the other day, J.D. Vance announced proudly that we've set up a new deconfliction mechanism for all the sides to have conversations every time there's some escalation in Lebanon. And that it's going to include the Iranians, and it's going to include the Americans and the Qataris and the Pakistanis, basically inviting the Iranians in officially to have a role in the Lebanon situation, which is, of course, angering the Lebanese people. I made a video about that just yesterday. Make sure you see that on this channel about the reactions in Lebanon to this, to what the Americans did here. But I think it's very simple what the Iranians are doing. They saw that their play to flex their muscles and use leverage and use the American desire for a deal to protect Hezbollah. That worked. That play in Lebanon worked, and they want to make a similar play in Gaza to protect Hamas. But things are moving in when it comes to the Board of Peace very slowly, very ineffectively. But let's take a look at what's going on. This is just from a couple of days ago, from this week, from June 23rd. Board of Peace members to recalibrate at Cyprus resort after rocky first 6 months. We're going to go through this article, and the rest of the articles we'll probably just read some excerpts, but this one we really have to get through. There's a lot in here. Representatives from the various bodies of the Board of Peace will gather at a resort in Cyprus next week as the U.S.-led international panel overseeing the post-war management of Gaza seeks to recalibrate after a rocky 6 months since its establishment. Meaning, here's the paraphrase. They haven't gotten much done. There's been no real movement, and they need to come up with a plan B. That's what's happening in Cyprus next week. Participants at the gathering will include representatives from the Board of Peace, the Committee of Palestinian Technocrats that are supposed to replace Hamas governing the Gaza Strip, and the Office of the High Representative that coordinates between the two bodies. An Arab diplomat from one of the mediating countries and a Palestinian official familiar with the matter described the gathering as an opportunity for everyone involved to reset and recalibrate and get on the same page after the past half year produced limited results for the people of Gaza. While the Board of Peace enjoyed initial international support and even a degree of buy-in from both Israel and Hamas, not really. Hamas said at the outset that they're not part of the deal, but so be it. The initiative has slowed as global attention shifted to the Iran war and as talks with Hamas on giving up its weapons remain entrenched. In other words, Hamas is still refusing to give up its weapons. The terror group argues that Israel should first abide by the terms of the October ceasefire, which required it to halt strikes deep in the Gaza Strip, pull back its troops toward the border, and allow in more humanitarian aid. While a February donor conference in Washington brought in $17 billion in pledges, only a tiny fraction of those funds have actually been transferred, as the Gulf countries that offered the largest sums were the most targeted by Iran in the weeks that followed, in what will likely force a budget reprioritization. Now, that budget reprioritization, folks, is not only about oh, they need money for other things because they haven't sold enough oil or they had damage from the war. No, no, no. And I talked about this in the early stages of the war. When Hamas was initially putting out statements of support for the Iranian regime when they were being attacked by Israel and the US, and they were, Hamas was cheering on the Iranians, and you saw there Abbas Araghchi thanking Hamas for their support. The Gulf states that were getting attacked by the Iranians, who had pledged money for the reconstruction of Gaza, looked at them and were like, and this includes Qatar, and they were like, what are you doing? Why are you backing Iran? And it put Hamas and the Palestinians in general, the Palestinian Authority was also stuck here because they were kind of praising the Iranians. It put them in a very tight spot. And it kind of led these Gulf states to say, like, do I really want to be investing money to help these people out? But they're never going to say it publicly because publicly they still are in favor of a Palestinian state. Meanwhile, the Board of Peace's sub-panel of Palestinian technocrats, the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, hasn't even entered the Strip amid Hamas's refusal to disarm and amid mounting Israeli restrictions on its ability to operate, according to two Arab diplomats from separate mediating countries. The 15-member panel has been stuck in Cairo since its establishment in January, using the time to craft plans for its Gaza launch, meet with Egypt-based and visiting diplomats, and even undergo several training sessions run by Tony Blair. And now, here it talks about what's holding things up. While the Board of Peace official acknowledged that the Iran war had slowed progress for several weeks, he insisted that the initiative is otherwise on track, despite Israeli violations of the ceasefire and Hamas's refusal to give up its weapons. The terror group has more recently made concessions in disarmament talks, putting forward proposals that would see it gradually give up some of its weapons after previously ruling the idea out entirely. However, the offers are conditioned on significant progress toward the establishment of a Palestinian state, a non-starter for Israel. Let me just say that this whole paragraph is a deviation from the Trump 20-point plan. See, Israel agreed to the Trump 20-point plan. And Hamas is now saying, we're only going to disarm a little bit, maybe some, if it's tied to progress towards a Palestinian state. And we saw earlier in the article, it said that Hamas is demanding that Israel fulfill its obligations to withdraw its troops as part of the next phase. And as we'll see in a moment, we'll pull up the plan itself, and you'll see that this has nothing to do with the original plan. Okay, we're going to...
All right, newly qualified coaches, practitioners, and health professionals, you have done the training. You've done it. But do you...
Now let's talk about the international stabilization force that's supposed to come in. So the Board of Peace officials said that regardless of whether or not Hamas accepts the U.S.-backed disarmament proposal, plans to start construction of temporary housing communities beginning with an Emirati-backed project on the ruins of the southern Gaza city of Rafah, are moving ahead, and construction will begin in the next 3 or 4 months. That area, as well as others initially earmarked for installment of temporary housing, is located in the gradually expanding part of the Strip occupied by Israel. While the October ceasefire deal saw Israel pull back its troops to a yellow line, roughly dividing the enclave into eastern and western halves, Israel has since pushed to reoccupy as much as 70% of the Strip as Hamas disarmament talks drag on. A Middle East intelligence official said mediators don't expect Israel to allow even temporary housing structures into the Strip before the fall elections, as Netanyahu seeks to maintain a hard line on Hamas. Now, let me just say, I'm not sure that this is wise. Let me explain why. Let me first pull up a map so you see what exactly I'm talking about. Okay, so let's take a look. So this is the map that was put out by the White House when the 20-point plan was first signed. Okay, so this is published by the White House, and what you see in here is that when it was originally signed, when the ceasefire first went into effect, the blue line is where Israel's troops were. Israel then pulled back to this yellow line here. That's the yellow line. And that was meant to facilitate the release of the hostages and the release of prisoners from Israeli prisons. And then this red line is where Israel's supposed to withdraw to after Hamas is demilitarized, after Hamas is disarmed, and the International Stabilization Force starts to move in. And it's even labeled here, second withdrawal when ISF mobilized per standards set in the Trump plan. And then there's this final withdrawal line, which allows a buffer zone, which keeps only a strip of buffer around the perimeter in Israeli hands. Okay, now Rafah is all the way down here. You see where Rafah is. I'm pointing to it right now on the yellow line here. Now, Israel today controls more than this yellow line. It controls up to around 70% of the Gaza Strip. It's been squeezing out Hamas more and more. We'll get into that in a moment. And what the Emiratis want to do, what the Americans want to do, is start building housing, temporary housing, in the Israeli-controlled areas. And Israel is blocking that because they're saying, no, there can be no reconstruction until we deal with Hamas. I think it's a mistake. Let me explain why. I think that what Israel should do is allow the building of temporary housing in the Israeli-controlled areas. Lots of it. Build tons of temporary housing. And allow for Gazans who are stuck in the Hamas-controlled areas to cross over. You can have a very controlled border crossing where you interview people and let them cross over and check them. And anyone who crosses over is now living in an area under full Israeli control in that housing, and they can get all the services and all the food and all the everything that they need, and schooling and whatever else they need, medical services. Put it all in the Israeli side, and start moving population out from under Hamas's control. This was the big mistake that Israel made throughout the war in Gaza, was that they never set up a mechanism to move the population out from underneath Hamas's control. The original idea of the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, which was that American operation distributing food, setting up those distribution centers out of Hamas-controlled areas, was not that people would come get their food and go back in. The original idea was that they would come and get their food and stay, and that you could only get food if you were outside of Hamas-controlled areas, because what keeps Hamas powerful is their control over the people. If they lose the population, they have nothing. So I think Israel should actually push forward full steam ahead on setting up all kinds of housing and amenities and all sorts of carrots to entice Gazans to leave Hamas control, and do that way. But listen, there's things that I don't understand. Maybe there's good reasons not to do it that way, but that's what I think should happen here. Anyway, back to our update.
I stopped taking notes 6 months ago on client calls, and I've increased my revenue by 200%.
So in terms of troops for the International Stabilization Force, while the Board of Peace has begun recruiting for the Gaza police and received thousands of applications, the Middle East intelligence officials said that Israel is refusing to allow recruits to leave before Hamas has accepted its disarmament proposal. And while 4 countries have agreed to contribute troops to the ISF, that process too has been stalled, and deployment is not expected before the fall Israeli elections. Okay, let's leave that there. And we also have this from 2 weeks ago, report Hamas given deadline to agree to Gaza disarmament by end of week. Pressure on Hamas is intensifying, with diplomats telling the New York Times that the Board of Peace representatives will meet the group in Cairo to finalize a disarmament deal. A senior official warned whoever does not cross the river will drown in the sea. And look what it says down here. According to diplomatic officials involved in the talks, the international body established to oversee a ceasefire that has been in place for 6 months is demanding that Hamas commit to dismantling nearly all of its weapons arsenal and provide detailed maps of its underground tunnel network. Wow. And Netanyahu, this is from about a month ago, a little less, Netanyahu said that he's directed the Israeli military to take over 70% of Gaza. Now, wait, isn't that a violation? No, it is not. Why? Well, let's take a look at the original plan. Where is the original plan? I thought I pulled it up here. Okay, we're going to go get the original ceasefire, the original 20-point plan. Here it is. Here's the 20-point Gaza peace plan. Here's the text of it. Now, according to this text, look what it says. It talks about releasing the hostages at the beginning. And then it says, once all the hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. Members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage to receiving countries. Okay, great. And then it says down here, Hamas and other factions agree to not have any role in the governance of Gaza, directly, indirectly, or in any form. All military, terror, and offensive infrastructure, including tunnels and weapons production facilities, will be destroyed and not rebuilt. There will be a process of demilitarization of Gaza, meaning disarming Hamas, under the supervision of independent monitors, which will include placing weapons permanently beyond use through an agreed process of decommissioning and supported by an internationally funded buyback and reintegration program, all verified by independent monitors.
The Fred Hollows Foundation has restored sight to more than 3 million people, but we need your help now, more than ever. For as little as $25.
So, if this is the plan, then Hamas is not disarmed. We're not moving forward. What's more, these calls for Israel to withdraw. Take a look at how withdrawal is supposed to work here. Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. As the ISF, the International Stabilization Force, that's this new security force that's yet to be deployed. As the ISF establishes control and stability, this is after Hamas is disarmed and removed, and they're not allowed to have any role indirectly or directly in Gaza. And after they're removed, when the ISF comes in, as they establish control, the Israel Defense Forces will withdraw based on standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization, meaning linked to the demilitarization, the disarming of Hamas, that will be agreed upon between the IDF, the ISF, the guarantors, and the United States, not Hamas, because they're not part of it. They're being removed, with the objective of a secure Gaza that no longer poses a threat to Israel or anyone else. Fine. Again, practically, the IDF will progressively hand over the Gaza territory it occupies to the ISF according to an agreement they will make with the transitional authority. So these demands by Hamas for Israel to withdraw as a precondition for laying down their weapons is not what this deal is. And let's be very clear. I'm not saying that this deal is a good deal in the sense that it'll ever be fulfilled. It's full of holes. The biggest hole is that it doesn't say how Hamas is supposed to be disarmed. It just says there will be a process. It'll be agreed upon. It doesn't say how it's going to happen. But let's be clear. This is what Israel agreed to. Israel does not need to withdraw one bit, because you're going to hear a lot of this in the coming days and weeks and months ahead. We're already hearing it, that Israel needs to withdraw. Israel does not need to withdraw. Gaza ceasefire talks stalled over disarmament demands. And this is from an Arab media outlet. Ceasefire negotiations in Egypt between Palestinian factions and international mediators are facing significant challenges as Nikolai Mladenov, the high representative of the Board of Peace, insists that not a single bullet should remain in Gaza. Key demands from the oversight body include the complete disarmament of Hamas, the surrender of maps detailing the group's tunnel operations, and the relinquishment of privately held weapons by Palestinians. According to Al Jazeera, the primary obstacle to a resolution is the handover of Palestinian weapons. Palestinian officials argue that the demand for total disarmament positions Mladenov as a facilitator for Israel's maximalist terms. A pivotal point in the negotiations is Clause 8 of the October 2025 ceasefire plan, which outlines disarmament and military infrastructure management in post-war Gaza. Initially, Hamas expressed willingness to discuss the handover of its inventory and storage of heavy weapons, a departure from its previous stance. However, the negotiations hit a snag when Mladenov rejected Hamas's proposed amendments because they wanted to keep weapons and stay in charge. Anyway, when Mladenov rejected them and aligned with Israeli demands for dismantling the entire tunnel network operated by the Qassam brigades, that's the military wing of Hamas.
Thanks for taking a look at the Aussie Gardener canvas tarps. Now, the reason we brought this product out is because
Mladenov has emphasized that the goal is to ensure Gaza is devoid of all weapons, stating that this includes not only organized armed groups, but also personal firearms held by individuals. The Palestinian factions have firmly opposed the total disarmament demand, viewing it as an attempt to undermine the peace process. You can't have a post-Hamas Gaza if Hamas still has weapons. It's very simple. They insist that any disarmament must be linked to a comprehensive political solution and full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. You see, they insist that disarmament must be linked to a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. That ain't happening. That's not what the plan says, folks. And Israel is just taking more of Gaza. Why is Israel doing this? Because Israel knows how to play the game. If you're going to delay and stall, Israel will get rid of Hamas one way or the other. When we signed this agreement, Prime Minister Netanyahu made it clear at the time. He said, look, we're willing to go along with this. But if Hamas is still there and no one else is going to disarm them, we will do it ourselves. And that's what Israel's doing, quietly on the down low, taking more territory, still eliminating Hamas operatives. But I think the next thing they should do is encourage the population to leave the Hamas-controlled areas. I know Israel doesn't want to be controlling an area with all these people there for all sorts of security reasons. But if you really want to get rid of Hamas, that's the best way to do it. Anyway, that's my opinion. Palestinian leaders have voiced their commitment to resist pressure regarding the issue. Okay, that they're not going to concede. And then we have this headline from Asharq al-Awsat. This is an Arab outlet that's out of the UK, actually. Hamas inclined toward positive response to Mladenov amendments. Not really. I mean, the headline says that they're inclined towards a positive response. Mladenov's amendments were, you got to dismantle, not a bullet, right? You got to dismantle all the weapons. So what does it say down here? Despite all the criticisms, all three sources said that Hamas and the factions are generally inclined to engage constructively with the revised proposal. They're expected to submit comments and additional amendments aimed at strengthening implementation of the original agreement. A formal response is expected within days. According to Hamas officials, the movement's leadership seeks to build on recent understandings reached in Cairo to secure a permanent end to the war and alleviate humanitarian suffering. A Hamas source outside the Gaza Strip said negotiators are working toward an agreement that would prevent Israel from maintaining long-term security control or creating a security vacuum by limiting weapons while continuing military operations, either directly or through armed groups that Hamas and other factions insist must be dismantled. So you see, Hamas, let me explain this. Hamas is insisting that anyone else with weapons has to lay down their weapons, because there are other armed groups in the Gaza Strip. Some of them have been armed by the Israelis, opposition to Hamas. So they're insisting that those guys get disarmed. They don't want to lay down their weapons, but they're insisting that they get disarmed. And they want to prevent Israel from having long-term security control. But as I showed you on that map, Israel's going to maintain long-term security control. That is a fact. That's not going to change. Meanwhile, what's been going on in the Gaza Strip, we have a UN report. Now, the UN is usually Hamas's best friend. So coming from the UN in Gaza, this is from just a couple weeks ago, a UN inquiry reports Hamas abuses against Palestinians. A report published Tuesday, June 9th, under the auspices of the United Nations, details abuses committed by the Islamist group to eliminate opposition and control Gaza, targeting rival clans and alleged collaborators with Israel. Public summary executions, limbs broken with iron bars, sexual violence, humiliation. These are some of the acts described in a report published under the auspices of the United Nations on Tuesday, June 9th. The International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel, gave a detailed account of violence perpetrated over the past 2 years by Hamas against Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Hamas used these punishments as a tool to eliminate opposition and control Gaza. The commission stated, describing some of the acts as war crimes and violations of international law. It's kind of absurd to talk about Hamas violating international law. They're a terrorist group. The commission identified 249 individual cases of executions or severe physical violence between August 2024 and January 2026, which means well after the ceasefire, they were still doing this, resulting in 108 deaths and 384 wounded among Palestinians. And that's only a portion of the victims.
Our pans are not cheap, so get this deal while it lasts. Our best-selling 13-piece.
Okay, so that's one thing going on. Now, in terms of the ISF, Moroccan contingent arrives in Israel to join the International Gaza Force. This fits in, interestingly, with the video. I made a video a few days ago that hopefully you've seen if you follow this channel. Very important video about Morocco. A little off the radar, but Morocco is an important player in the Middle East, and about the relationship between Morocco and the United States and Israel and what their role is. Israel, suffice it to say that Israel has a very trusting, friendly relationship with Morocco, and Morocco has sent troops, and they've arrived. But they're now in Israel kind of in a holding pattern like everyone else because the International Stabilization Force is not moving in. But we have Moroccan troops that have arrived, and there we go. So that's what I wanted to share with you. That there are some, the talks are still ongoing. Bottom line is this: where do we stand? Iran is trying to use the same leverage they used to save Hezbollah, to save Hamas. They're trying that. Meanwhile, the Board of Peace is meeting again in Cyprus, and they're trying to get past this deadlock. Mladenov, the high commissioner, whatever his title is, the guy who's in charge of this whole thing, the Board of Peace and all that, he's ramping up the pressure on Hamas to disarm. Meanwhile, the Israelis are not waiting around. They're taking more and more of the Gaza Strip, moving in there, trying to squeeze out Hamas. They're still eliminating Hamas leaders, and Hamas always calls that violations of the ceasefire. It's not violations of the ceasefire. No one else is getting rid of Hamas. It's the only way to do it. This 20-point plan was supposed to be implemented a long time ago, and Israel said at the outset, if you're not going to disarm Hamas, we're going to do it. We're not just going to entrust our security to this impotent Board of Peace that's not actually going to do the job. The 20-point plan is very clear. Hamas must disarm before anything else can happen. It's a precondition, and it even says that they can have no role in the governance of Gaza, either directly or indirectly. And now they're negotiating over which weapons they're going to give up, and are they going to give up their weapons? There shouldn't even be a negotiation, according to the 20-point plan. All Israel should be insisting on is the implementation of the 20-point plan exactly as written, or we go in and disarm Hamas ourselves. That should be Israel's position. And like I said, these efforts afoot now to create alternative housing on the Israeli side in Rafah area, I think is wonderful, and Israel should encourage that rather than hold it up. Let's move people into those areas. Every Gazan who leaves Hamas control, either to go to another country or to go into the Israeli-controlled area, is one more degradation of Hamas's power. Anyway, there's our update from Gaza.